Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Jen Hughes at the National Endowment for the Arts. I serve as the Senior Advisor to the Chair on Partnerships, Expansion, and Innovation, having most recently served as the NEA Director of Design and Creative Placemaking. And I'll be your host today. Today's event is jointly hosted by the National Endowment for the Arts and Local Initiative Support Corporation as part of the Our Town Creative Placemaking Technical Assistance Program. The Technical Assistance Program launched in 2016 with the explicit goal of supporting NEA Our Town grantees and the broader field to implement successful creative placemaking projects that help to advance local goals and catalyze long-term systems change. The Our Town Grant Program began in 2011 and is now in its 13th year. The NEA has made 677 awards and distributed $48.4 million in grant funding to creative placemaking projects in rural, urban, and tribal communities in all 50 states and 3 territories. Awards have been made to local government entities, 501c3 nonprofits, and several indigenous tribal nations to fund projects that integrate arts, culture, and design into efforts that strengthen community. This session today will offer both reflections and inspiration on the Our Town program, featuring 2 projects that have been supported by Our Town grants. We hope that you walk away inspired with a deepened commitment to conceiving local projects that engage artists, designers, culture bearers to help advance local change. We begin our program today with a cultural grounding led by Autumn White Eyes. Autumn is a queer, two-spirit femme, spoken word artist and arts educator. You can read their full bio and the bios of all the speakers today by clicking on the link in the chat. And now, Autumn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jen. Hami takiapi, Dayawa chiankapi, Autumn White Eyes, and machiapi. Wazia ahaha, amataha na laha, bade ota. Awatiye chante washdeana pe chizapi ikshto. Hello, relatives. It's good to see you all. My name is Autumn White Eyes. I am from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in so-called South Dakota, but I currently live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I greet you with a heartfelt handshake. I'm calling in right now from my reservation where I'm originally from. I'm here visiting family and also working on some projects with the young people. As Jen mentioned, I am an arts educator. I'm the Associate Director of Youth Development at First Peoples Fund, where I help to manage a spoken word program for the young people in the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, but also through communities throughout Indian country. And so I also wanted to take a second for this cultural grounding for us to acknowledge the Native peoples and the Native lands whose ancestral homelands that we occupy on Turtle Island and the so-called United States. So we have a link to a website, native-land.ca, where you can look up the Native homelands that you currently occupy. And I just want to encourage everyone to learn about those lands and about the Native peoples of those lands and where we are at now, not because it's an institutional trend, but because it's important that we understand the history of the U.S. as all people living in the U.S. currently as settlers in the U.S. and recognizing the privileges that we have as individuals on this land. So I just want to encourage you all to do that. Today, I'm going to be sharing a poem with you all. This poem is from my short book of poetry called Instructed by Hawi. Hawi is from Lakota oral tradition, and it means the moon. So instructed by the moon. And my book is about different energies and phases and things I've gone through and the feminine nature that the moon has. And so the name of the poem I'm going to be reading today is called Indigene, a Love Poem to Pine Ridge. It's a poem for the place that I call home. And so in the chat, we're going to put a link to the words of the poem in case you'd like to follow along that way. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Every day I'm away from you, I think of what I'd like to say the next time someone asks me where I'm from. What words I would replace impoverished, oppressed, and forgotten with. You are media mistaken. There are rose-colored Lakotas tucked away in the prairies of South Dakota. We are sitting on the other side of your poverty porn. Dissect us with your lens. Zoom in and see we are only human. Once we're warriors, idle and forgotten, 7 generations from Wounded Knee, and we would like to reclaim Indigene. You see, you and me are not far from an agreement. We are sitting on the other side of poverty porn. Dissect us with your lens and fall asleep to every thunderstorm. Feel your house shake and remember the smell of sweetgrass. Ask the Wakias not to take us tonight. There are red willow trees we would pick before the thunder shook us. Scraping off the bark for the chanupa, our sacred pipe. It's the kind of smell you'll never forgetting that man, the one lying in the street, and his blood was splattered like his rose-colored skin, or the sick swagger of every man sizing up to his brothers wishing the Lakota warriors wouldn't confuse themselves with gangsters. But everyone wants to be a part of something when we've been left behind. But Glocks are just a synonym for protection, just like the streets. The streets are just a synonym for being afraid of who we become. Lakota by teaching, Oglala by fight, and this is our sanctuary. Kamad fed, casino led, power red. The only thing we can agree on is our heroes are the ones who killed cowboys like Custer, preyed on mountains in Chetzapa, and died at Wounded Knee. But we are just the offspring of broken boarding schools, red bandanas, and reservation-raised, reclaimed, rose-colored Lakotas. Black, red, yellow, white, you are media mistaken, white man's Western, headdress hipsters, Washington Redskins. You are media mistaken, and this is our story. Indigene, not defined by our res, but we redefine our res. This is our voice, replacing our bows and arrows, or pens and papers, paintbrushes. We count coup by the stories that we tell, and it's a whole new Indian war. You see, we are holding on to our heritage in new ways. We shake the streets with our res bombs, half cars barely running, bumping the oldest hip hop because Tupac is the only one who knows our struggle. I left my heart at Big Bats, Yo Courts, and Billy Mills Hall, left my heroes on Crazy Horse Monument, and my heritage in the Black Hills to always come back to you. Because my home will always be here. Pine Ridge, Pine Ridge, Pine Ridge. We still sing our songs, speak our language, and tell our stories in a new way until the sun shines down from the universe, reminding us we are just merely human, like you and me. Yet we are still balancing indigeneity, our indigene. Thank you all. If you would like to read more of my poetry, I do have a book of poems and also at my website. And I'm gonna go ahead and pass it back to Jen, and just wanna say thank you again for having me at this webinar.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for that incredibly moving poem and cultural grounding to really kick off our session today. That's the second time I've had the pleasure to really be in your presence in this type of space, and just really appreciate the way that you move all of us with your work, reminding us both of the importance of place and its connection to our identity, history, and what matters as we think about place-based work. Thank you, Autumn. And now it's an honor and a privilege to introduce our featured speaker, NEA Chair Dr. Maria Rosario Jackson. For more than 25 years, Chair Jackson's work has focused on the understanding and elevating arts, culture, and design as critical elements of healthy communities. In December 2021, Dr. Jackson was confirmed by the Senate as the 13th chair of the National Endowment for the Arts, and we're so honored to have her with us here today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jen. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to join you today for this webinar where we'll reflect on and highlight the National Endowment for the Arts Our Town program. I want to thank the Local Initiative Support Corporation for their partnership in the Creative Placemaking Technical Assistance Program for a number of years now. And I'd like to begin by offering some high-level reflections before we shift into a conversation with my colleague, Jen Hughes. The last 2.5 years have been challenging. I think all of you know. They've been challenging to say the least. We've endured a pandemic, or are enduring a pandemic. There's been heightened racial reckoning, social and political polarization, global instability, environmental challenges. It's been and continues to be an extraordinary time that's full of trials, but it's also full of evidence of strength and possibility. Not surprisingly, that evidence of strength and possibility is often connected to creativity and the arts. Our creativity and imagination have allowed us to respond, adapt, step up. In addition to the vital economic impact of the sector, the arts are crucial to our health and well-being. The arts help us mourn, celebrate, speak out, cope, connect, and find both meaningful differences and common ground. We see this nationally, locally, and globally. What I've surmised over the years is that at its best, the integration of arts, culture, and design rely on a more expansive, inclusive concept than what we have held up as a society for the most part. So the following guiding premises have undergirded my work for many years, and I'd like to share them with you. First, all people have the capacity to be creative, and creativity is an individual and a community asset from which to build. Very importantly, communities are not blank slates, and often what is overlooked, especially in historically marginalized communities, are the creativity and culture that exists there. A second idea is that the ability for people to be expressive and tell their own stories on their own terms is a critical dimension of justice and equity. It's part of our ethos, and at its best, we embrace it. Third, arts and cultural activity happens in many kinds of places: community centers, commercial venues, parks, public streets, not only in cultural presenting venues, which without question are very important, but it includes lots of ways of participating, and more so than audience participation. People engage in the arts by making, doing, teaching, in addition to consuming as audience or as purchaser. Fourth, art process can be as important as, or even in some cases, more important than art product. And that's sometimes a hard concept to grasp because we're socialized to look to the end product that will be consumed as the main thing. But the act of being in creative process, especially collective creative process, has value in and of itself. And it often generates agency, stewardship, social cohesion. It contributes to the creation of new narratives, enables us to hold nuance and appreciate complexity, all of which I think of as preconditions for other community goals. Fifth, artists and designers have many kinds of relationships to publics and roles within communities. Artists and designers and culture bearers can help us to imagine policy, to create programs, to help us understand how things are working or not, and help us imagine other ways of working and envision what we aspire to do. Last, the arts are intrinsically important, full stop. At the same time, they're important because they contribute to other community dynamics and help address community needs and aspirations. These 6 ideas allow for a more expansive understanding of arts, culture, design, how these connect to the important areas of work represented among all of you. So I just wanted to share those big ideas because they, I think, help us see possibilities that sometimes are not so obvious if we think in a narrow way about the role of arts organizations and artists. in our communities and in our efforts to improve the places where we live and work. And with that, I'll turn it back to my colleague, Jen Hughes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair Jackson, for sharing those guiding principles that I'd argue so much of what you really shared there undergirds the Our Town program that has, and the type of work that the program's funded and supported over the years. So perhaps we can dive into our conversation, just specifically talking about Our Town a bit, starting with, now that you're at the NEA and over your time that you've intersected with the program, what really excites you about this particular portfolio of grants at the agency?
Yeah, you know, I think and have thought for years that the Our Town program helps the NEA support work that really unleashes the power of the arts in different ways than are typically thought of in a traditional understanding of the cultural sector. I believe that at their most powerful, the arts are integrated into our everyday lived experience. And there's an opportunity through the Our Town program to be intentional about integrating art, culture, design with other sectors like public health, transportation, housing, among others. So the fact that it is a venue through which we can really do this work of arts integration and move away from thinking about the arts as separate from or apart from our daily lived experience. I find so much value in the ability to do that through this particular portfolio.
And I know during your time as chair, I guess 10-ish months since you've been in the role so far, you've been traveling quite a bit across the nation. Could you share anything that sort of resonates from your visits on the ground in communities that might intersect with past Our Town grantees?
Oh, absolutely. It's been so gratifying to travel and repeatedly hear in so many different kinds of communities that the Our Town program has seeded work that is now robust. And the time horizon for the work sometimes can be long. And there's also projects that are short-term and have more immediate impact, but many are long-term and not always certain. One example that comes to mind immediately is the development of some artists' live workspace in the LA area, Los Angeles. And when I was visiting there was reference to seed funding from very early rounds of the Our Town program. It was in 2012 or 2013. And I think it was a feasibility study, and it had to do with some of the planning efforts related to the work. And now fast forward 10 years, there's a 2-block artist housing development that was about ready to open. And to hear that that was an Our Town investment that has borne fruit, and big fruit at that, because it's a very impressive development that I think will serve artists really well in the area. I heard similar things in the upper Northwest with performing arts venues. And I think it's just really important to know that sometimes the time for something to come to fruition doesn't necessarily match up with grant cycles. And to be aware of that is really important. But it has been tremendously gratifying to know that the Arts Endowment has had a role to play, even if it has a long tail, in things that are coming to fruition now or have taken a while to bloom.
That's great. And that really resonates as we shift to the 2 projects we're going to feature later about really that time horizon, because the Our Town grant program is funding 1 to 2 year projects that are part of an arc of a longer time horizon that we really see, hopefully seeding, catalyzing work that lives on, grows, scales, is replicated above and beyond, and that ultimately arts and culture is integrated into how communities conceive holistically of the community's well-being. On that note, how does the Our Town program fit into your overarching vision during your tenure as chair? And As many of you may or may not know, the Arts Town program runs on an annual cycle. So as you are thinking about this program vis-a-vis your vision and time at the NEA, are there ways that you might conceive of the grant program evolving?
Mhm. Well, I think the Our Town program fits so squarely with a couple of big concepts that I've been talking about and writing about. One of them has to do with the importance of living and aspiring to live artful lives, lives where creativity, making, doing, experiencing, seeing, listening, all of those, art, culture, design, that's part of how we think of our well-being, that an artful life is a really important dimension of that. So that's one idea that I think has programmatic expression in the Our Town program. Another idea has to do with the role that the arts play in what I think of as our civic infrastructure. And that is the sets of relationships and mechanisms that we rely on to care for each other. And it requires thinking really holistically about where the arts legitimately have a role. And I believe that at their most powerful, again, the work doesn't exist in a bubble, in isolation, but it butts up against other areas of policy and practice. And certainly that happens in the Our Town program. And in fact, over the past decade plus of experience in the Our Town program, there have been some really important precedents for working at the intersection of arts and housing, arts and climate, arts and transportation. Increasingly, I'm interested in the role of the arts in relation to public health, and particularly as the public health sector begins to or continues to expand its notion of what are determinants of health outcomes, and it begins to meander into the world of community development and planning. I think there's a really robust opportunity for the arts to be in that mix. So as they think about housing, as they think about racial inequity, and other things that haven't for many years or heretofore been thought of as health issues, I think there's a lot of opportunity for intersection of arts, culture, and design with health in that space of community development and planning.
That's fantastic. And it's been really heartening to see some really interesting models over the course of the Our Town program's history that are really driving projects and orienting them towards achieving health outcomes in community. I think when I heard you speaking, one of the things you really lifted up was this concept and notion of civic infrastructure. Interestingly enough, we have two really fantastic projects that are going to speak to both physical and civic infrastructure in Philadelphia and Louisville. And infrastructure really feels like it's of the moment, with historic investments coming from the federal level, trickling down to the local as it relates to long-term impacts on our built environment. As you think about the significant investment in infrastructure, what role do you perceive arts and culture playing in that space?
I think that there's so many important roles that artists, designers, arts organizations can play in relation to some of the investments related to physical infrastructure. And I think of civic infrastructure as parallel at its best, right, with those kinds of investments. So for example, there's work that the Department of Transportation is involved in that is really redressing some of the harm that came from urban renewal decades ago. And it's a huge program, a $1 billion program on reconnecting communities. And this is a program where there is opportunity for, and even potentially incentives for, artists and arts organizations to become involved in that reconnection. And I've been so gratified to hear people who are working on that initiative actually talk about how they recognize that that reconnection isn't only about physical infrastructure, but mending other kinds of ruptures, let's say. So the idea of parallel civic infrastructure or arts-infused civic infrastructure alongside physical infrastructure, I think, is really powerful. And there's the opportunity to braid them at times when there is evidence of our efforts to build civic infrastructure actually as part of our physical infrastructure. And this is often where public art shows up, right? And the process, often community-based process of creating the kinds of visual and tactile representations that tell stories of communities that are sometimes at risk of being erased, or where the history has been ignored or misrepresented. There are many opportunities to, I think, address that kind of harm, that necessity to make it right. And the arts have so much to do with that. We can't do it without the arts. I really do believe that.
That's fantastic. I think that as we're kind of closing in on our time together, do you have any departing or closing thoughts you'd like to share with this audience, knowing that we have a couple hundred folks attending, probably coming from all different sectors, to really be thinking about the arts, culture, design, integration work that you've really lifted up? Do you have optimism, pessimism, other things that you're kind of thinking or keeping your eye on at this moment in time and at this moment in history?
I have a lot of optimism, actually. I better have a lot of optimism, and I do. But I think that it is an optimism that has to be fed with action. And that requires thinking beyond what has been traditional in terms of what are artists' lanes and what are the lanes of arts organizations. It takes a particular set of skills to engage in this kind of work, and cultivating those skills among artists and arts organizations that choose to this path as part of their practice, I think, is really important. But I'm so encouraged that there is take up. There is traction when I talk about the idea of arts-infused civic infrastructure with people who are working on physical infrastructure. I'm not getting a lot of puzzled looks. I'm getting feedback that is very encouraging, and that I think signals important opportunities ahead that we should really take advantage of. As the pandemic has caused us all to question our orthodoxies, there's an opportunity not just to snap back to what was, but to reset some parameters of what we think of as the cultural sector in ways that are really beneficial. And I think that including that work that happens at the intersections, whether it's health or housing or transportation, I think it only bodes well. It's a win-win scenario where we are in the cultural sector helping others do their work better, and at the same time expanding opportunities for artists and arts organizations. So I'm really excited about that.
Well, I think that's a fantastic place to leave our conversation. I know we could talk for much longer, but just wanted to thank you, Chair Jackson, for this conversation today, for giving us some hints and insight into your reflections and where your head is at this moment. And I think with that, we will now shift to spotlighting two of our Town grantees. So first up, we're going to be hearing from Rebecca Chan and Ishii. We're headed to Philadelphia, where Rebecca is the executive director of the Friends of the Rail Park, the organization dedicated to bringing the rail park a vision for a 3-mile greenway and infrastructure reuse project to life. Anne is the executive director of Asian Arts Initiative, which has operated with a mission to create community through the power of art in the North Chinatown neighborhood of Philadelphia since 1993. So they're going to be talking about their Our Town project that is just getting underway, supported by a 2022 Our Town grant. And the project is the CUT, Ecosystems Land-Based Initiatives in Philadelphia's Chinatown, North, and Callow Hill neighborhoods.
All right. Thanks so much, Jen. So this is the rail park. It's a vision for a 3-mile linear park and pathway that is following and reusing former rail lines of the historic Pennsylvania and Reading railroads. There are 3 distinct sections: the viaduct, the cut, and the tunnel. And in total, it spans 50 city blocks crossing through 10 neighborhoods. When completed, it's going to provide access to nature, arts and culture, and urban recreational space, all within a 10-minute walk for more than 130,000 Philadelphians. It's a massive infrastructure reuse project and will connect and transform Philadelphia in the process of its development. Phase 1, which is a 1/4-mile stretch of elevated viaduct, opened in 2018. It was made possible through a partnership between SEPTA, which is our regional transit authority here in Philadelphia, the City of Philadelphia, Center City District, and my organization, Friends of the Rail Park. And when it opened, it introduced public art, native plantings, and playful oversized swings to neighborhoods with just 4% tree cover. We program this space with over 50 free events, gathering in tours a year, spanning arts and culture, health and wellness, and nature and the environment, which really as an organization we see as an interwoven tapestry rather than silos of work and interest groups. So as we contemplate phase 2 of the rail park, which is a 0.8-mile section owned by SEPTA known as the CUT, arts, culture, and creative placemaking has been a core component of our strategy and longer-term advocacy and planning work. And at this point, you're probably wondering, Rebecca, it seems like you really have your hands full, why arts and culture? And this is really because arts and culture, this is really because infrastructure projects like the rail park take a really long time to develop. They often follow opaque development processes. And what we've realized is that arts and culture and artists and culture bearers help us unpack and make this process more accessible by doing what artists do best, which is help us understand and translate the world we live in, and also envision a shared future that we can't quite see yet on our own. So what arts and culture is really doing is helping and inviting people to imagine possibilities of space and place. We're also seeing that arts and culture is helping us as an organization to understand, design, and plan around community voice and vision, working with many different neighborhoods, communities, and stakeholders, and each has its own culture, its own community development goals and aspirations for place. And so working with artists and culture bearers helps us in an asset-based way to embed community voice, values, and vision in an otherwise massive undertaking. So with that context in mind, I want to pass this on to my colleague, Anne, to talk about our Town project, Ecosystems, and just thank you so much. Take it away, Anne.
Thanks, Rebecca. So Ecosystems, Land-Based Initiatives, is a collaborative project stewarded by Asian Arts Initiative with Friends of the Rail Park. And I've created this sort of summary slide for anybody who would prefer to just read static phraseology. This and the last slide are the ones that matter. So I will not be offended if you take a screenshot and mute me for the rest of the 5 minutes I have. Next slide. So we have commissioned environmental health and land justice advocates, Dr. Ashley Gripper and Sonia Galabert, to lead this project. Ashley, when I first met her, said, I'm not an artist. I in no way describe myself as an artist. And Sonia, whom we met later, has described her creative practices mostly as an antidote to her work in activism. However, we at Asian Arts Initiative believe that this work, building relationships, engaging the public through a trust-building process, demonstrating change in the service of beauty, and pausing to celebrate our cooperative achievements is art, is culture. These are two of the most creative artists I've worked with as an administrator, not the least of reasons being their tenacity and patience with their own concepts most of the time, but also with others. And because they understand that inherent to change making is the fundamental belief that the process is itself as important as the outcome, as Dr. Jackson noted earlier. The sketches are as important as the paintings. Ecosystems have much to teach us about process. Emergent strategies, a phrase we're very fond of, borrows from the process of mycological ecosystems whose adaptations to their environments is the very outcome of their work. The process is the outcome. Natural ecosystems thrive with only liminal human interventions. And with the great fallout of insect biomes in urban environments like Central Philly, we were really overjoyed to discover how bees were populating the green spaces of the cut, as you just saw in the video. And we wondered if this could tell us something about how we thrive in social communities. Holding this unique space in the cut portion of the rail park requires a multifaceted partnership with stakeholders of such political and social diversity as to make us sometimes want to give up. This is the process, and it requires building trust. How will we ever convince them to see this our way, we wonder? It seems impossible. And here I just wanted to show you a before and after. So in August, we first went to the cut with this is Ashley with her arms spread open, inviting in the ecosystem. And then we had a really important meeting with the stakeholders, the landowners. And as if we had not just had this conversation about this insect biome, in the next slide, you'll see that they raised the whole area to the ground. Now I want to go back to the first slide, the August slide. We as a culturally specific arts organization serves communities of color affected by forced migration, enslavement, and are highly attuned to the difficulty of negotiating relationships with the status quo. So in a manner of speaking, no one is better poised to engage such a diversity of ideologies, to make change. We leverage hope, we leverage beauty. And I've learned from a multitude of people that this will come back to life. The ecosystem will grow back into its full glory. The thesis of our project is to rewrite how we talk about plant and insect life in this public space in order to see how people have also been misplaced by political taxonomy. By carefully deconstructing the notion of invasive plant and insect species and calling out the hypocrisy of Americans venerating native plants but not native peoples, we demonstrate that we are all here through a configuration of force, intent, but most importantly, nature. By celebrating the aspects of our ecosystem deemed invasive or alien, we demonstrate to the political authors of our identities the imperative to see how we matter to each other, how important it is for us to define ourselves. I guess it's, yeah, thank you. The trust building process of community-based arts projects with key stakeholders in regional rail, commercial real estate, and public education is long. SEPTA measures its progress in generations. Well, so do we. So in between our mile markers is a sequence of gatherings and engagements, social events, block parties, tincture making workshops, somatic experiences, art. We keep establishing trust in order to engender a process that takes exactly as long as it needs to. And to quote a controversial but ultimately lionized general manager for the Philadelphia Sixers, Sam Hinkie, we learn to trust the process. And here's the last slide recapping most of what I just said. The work is hard and takes a long time. Artists can do it. And there you go. Thank you. And I'll send it back to Jen.
Thank you, Anne. And Rebecca, so much of what you shared really resonated. I heard a lot of the principles that Dr. Jackson lifted up at the outset in her opening remarks about how critical the artistic and creative community process is and the time that it really takes to make this work happen. We're really enthused and excited to see as this project continues to take life and seeds a lot of exciting collaborative work with a transportation authority and community in Philadelphia. So moving on from Philadelphia, let's travel on down to Louisville. I am thrilled to introduce Hannah Drake, the Chief Creative Officer at Ideas xLab, a dynamic artist-run nonprofit based in Louisville, Kentucky, that is also working nationally. This organization utilizes the art of storytelling and community collaboration to impact public health. And Hannah is also the co-lead artist of the Our Town project that was funded in 2020 called The Unknown Project.
Thank you. It is difficult to stand in spaces that weren't designed for me, spaces that were not created for people that look like me, and spaces that scream, "You do not belong here." That is an excerpt from my poem Spaces that speaks about making spaces inclusive or exclusive. I recited that poem in front of the base of the Castleman statue, a Confederate statue in Kentucky, just hours after it was removed after standing for over 100 years. I told the people that came outside to hear me recite the poem, how they felt in that moment is how they can feel all the time in choosing the art that they decide to put into public spaces. At Ideals xLab, we believe in the transformational power of art and proactively seek to unearth and honor community stories that transform people, spaces, and culture. Our journey with public art and the Unknown Project started in 2016 during a visit to Dakar, Senegal, when my coworker Josh Miller and I, along with Roots and Wings, a group of performance artists, visited Gorée Island and the House of Slaves, which was the final stop before enslaved Africans were placed on ships and brought to America. As I stood in the door of no return, I wanted to see what the other side of this looked like in America. It was a story that I had never really heard much of about in Kentucky, but as life would have it, our work took us to Natchez, Mississippi, where we were able to visit plantations, stand in fields of cotton, learn history, and during our visit, we visited Natchez's African American Museum, and we noticed a map on the wall that traced the route south from Kentucky to Mississippi via the Ohio River to Forks of the Road, which was the second largest slave market in the South. We immediately understood that Kentucky was intricately involved in the slave trade, and in fact, had sold 80,000 people to the South. We also visited the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, which is a memorial dedicated to Black people that have been lynched in America. In order for your state to be listed in this memorial, your state had to lynch 100 or more people. Kentucky lynched 169 people that they know of. As we noticed all of the names listed, there was a word that continued to stand out: unknown. 8 of the 169 people listed for Kentucky were listed as unknown. And in that moment, the Unknown Project was birthed. How could we use art to start finding the names of people that were enslaved in Kentucky? The timing for the Unknown Project coincided with the city of Louisville requesting proposals for the Our Town program. To help conceptualize the Unknown Project, we partnered with Roots 101 African American Museum, Fraser History Museum, and our Louisville Metro government. From the very start of the project, it was very community driven and all partners had input. We did a call for artists to create an art installation that would tell the story of enslaved people in Kentucky. William M. Duffy was selected as the lead artist, and he invited Dave Caudell to help him design and create On the Banks of Freedom. After many meetings with community members and stakeholders, the design was complete, and on Juneteenth of 2021, the On the Banks of Freedom public art installation was revealed to the community. On the Banks of Freedom is Unknown Project's first art installation that sits on the banks of the Ohio River. It consists of 2 granite, limestone, and steel benches that are etched with some discovered names of Black people that were enslaved in Kentucky. On each bench is a rendering of an enslaved person, and the benches sit on top of a concrete platform that are sandblasted with 6 sets of footprints supplied by Black Louisvillians that people can stand in, looking across the Ohio River into Indiana, which would have been the first step on the pathway to freedom from Kentucky. The Unknown Project has been embraced by the Louisville community, with community members hosting events at the space, and it is also a part of Louisville Tourism's Unfiltered Truth collection. One thing that I love to note is that since this project was launched, over 800 names have been discovered by community members and from people bringing forth the names of people that their family did in fact enslaved. Many people are not unknown, they're just intentionally hidden from history. This project has allowed a space for people to come forward with information to allow for acknowledgement, reconciliation, and healing. If you want to go to the next slide, you can go to the next slide. In October of 2022, the city of Louisville announced a $50 million investment for the waterfront park development to expand the Riverwalk where On the Banks of Freedom resides. And the Unknown project will be the gateway for this expansion. The expansion of the waterfront park in Louisville's West End will help bridge the geographical racial divide that separates the city. We are so thankful for the NEA for investing in the Unknown project, allowing us to see it to come to fruition and supporting us as we sought to transform a community impacted by injustice. We are also happy that we are expanding beyond Louisville, creating the Unknown Project Trail in other locations throughout the United States to acknowledge the stories, places, and names of Black and enslaved people that will be unknown no longer. Thank you so much, NEA, and thank you, Jen.
Hannah, thank you for that incredibly moving project and just really the evidence of how what you've been seeding in this work with Josh Miller has had such a catalytic impact that's really reverberating into the future. I think that really embodies our true aspiration and theory of change of the Our Town grant program to really help to fund and catalyze work that has an incredible ripple of impacts, many of which perhaps you might not have been able to envision day one when starting that project. Well, I just want to say and wrap up a little bit early, give you back a little bit of time with a huge thank you to all of you listening in for engaging with us today. Like I said, we have a couple hundred folks here, so it's been really special to see the chat going and share space with you all. If you'd like to learn more about the NEA Our Town program, I'd encourage you to visit arts.gov and to sign up for our NEA Design and Creative Placemaking newsletter. We'll drop the email in the chat. You can just shoot us an email there. So that way we can add you to future notifications of funding deadlines and other news from the NEA. If you'd like to tap the many resources that have been created by the Our Town Creative Placemaking Technical Assistance Program, check out our really robust toolkit on the LISC's website. And a little plug, the Our Town program, the grant program, will have guidelines published in May with a deadline of August. So keep an eye out for those. So as we wrap, I want to take a minute to acknowledge all the incredible people who contributed to making today happen, to our extraordinary presenters, Autumn, Rebecca, Anne, Hannah, Dr. Jackson, our behind the scenes tech team, Thomas and Allie, and the really fantastic leadership of the Our Town Creative Placemaking Technical Assistance Program, Melissa Kim, Margie Waller, Maya Herring, and Courtney Spearman, and Mina Kim, who just joined us. It truly takes a village to produce an event like the one today, and we want to just wish you all an inspired day. Thank you for being here.